This is my first online class. Hopefully you can see, I'm at a Carolina Bay, beautiful background here. Took a little time out from my sun tanning to come do a little chat on Carolina Bay. So I'm really delighted to be here. I wish I could see you guys in person. So virtual hugs and kisses and whatever else to you today. I hope your health is good and that this education finds you in good spirits. I'm gonna switch over to screen sharing real quick, and giving me a little bit of a, I think Shannon, I might need to get,
Let me,
something about, well, so while we're working on that.
give that another try, Austin.
Okay. There we go. Awesome. So I just want to kind of give you an idea of what I had in mind today, since we're not actually out in the woods together. I'm going to kind of walk through one of my favorite places on earth, which is Savage Bay Heritage Preserve. And I'm kind of going to blend this together with what I would typically do with my students at USC Sumter or Master Naturalist. And assume that, you know, some of our viewers and maybe many of them are not aware of Carolina Bays. And so we're going to pretend like we just plopped out of nowhere and we're just walking through the forest and all of a sudden we come up on a Carolina Bay. We'll eventually get to some of the, so we'll observe some of the species that we see along the way, and then eventually get to some of the hypotheses behind the origins of the Carolina Bays toward the end there. But I wanted to present it to you as you might, actually witness it. Not knowing anything about these places before. So without further ado, I'm gonna cruise through my slideshow here, and I'll try to make pauses so that Shannon can talk to me and let me know if you guys have any questions. And as she mentioned, I'm definitely willing to hang out and chat, and answer any questions afterwards. But Savage Bay Heritage Preserve is one of many different heritage preserves that your South Carolina Department of Natural Resources has protected across our state, and we're so thankful for the great work that they do. This one is just outside of my hometown of Camden, South Carolina, not too far north of Goodall State Park. So I've just screenshotted the page there from the DNR website, and it's just up Highway 1, which of course will take you to Florida or all the way up to Maine if you want to go. But along the way, there's Savage Heritage Preserve. And it is just off of what's called Drakeford Road. It's fairly easy to get to, fairly easy to find. There's pretty good parking lot. Beyond that, it can be difficult to navigate. But I can talk about some of the ways that you might access it if you so choose later on. So this, again, is coming from DNR website. So if you wish to kind of get a better idea of where this is located, you'll be able to do that from the internet. So I was out there, it was probably 3 weeks ago is when I went out and kind of did some recordings and some pictures and stuff just to try to capture this as best I can in a virtual format. And when you just step out of the car, you're in a very, high, dry upland area full of sparse vegetation. What's there is, scrub oaks and also longleaf pines. This is one of the more famous of the 4 scrub oaks. Some of the master naturalists have experienced all 4 of them, but this is the one that's called turkey oak because of the leaves that to somebody looked a little bit like the foot of a turkey. And so these are especially present here. Whenever you see turkey oak, as my granddad said, it's not worth digging for water because the water's a long way down. Turkey oak tends to inhabit the most upland areas of the sandhills ecoregion, which is where we are. We're in that kind of middle section of our state, running through Aiken and all the way up to like Marlborough County, for example. So high, dry, and the species there are adapted to it. So it's not something that you would say, oh, this is going to be a nice bay-like wet environment. But nonetheless, this is one of the first species you see, and you see it's in the broad sun, so it turns its leaves, especially during the day, it inverts them so that they are vertical and not horizontal, so they don't lose too much water and desiccate and become even more stressed than they already are. So turkey oak is one of the first things that hit you in the face, and oops, I'm gonna do this. I had had the bright idea of, making this in video format, and but the file size got a little bit too big to share over over Zoom, and so I'm going to kind of just crop to the different pieces that I want to depict for you. This is a young longleaf pine. They look so cuddly. I mean, I just want to hug these things until you actually do, and they kind of poke you. But this is, sort of the trademark species of our sandhills and coastal plain, and it is doing well here at Savage Bay Heritage Preserve. The managers, such as Johnny Stowe and others, are doing their best to bring this back as much as possible. But this is a species that is doing well at Savage Bay and taking up not just the understory, but some of the canopy as well. Longest needles, Rudy Mankey said it best. If you're trying to figure out pine trees, hold your hand out, put the needle on top of your hand. If the needle stretches past your hand, that's longleaf pine most of the time, right? If it's about the same distance as your hand, it's usually loblolly. And if it's shorter, then it's maybe shortleaf pine or Virginia pine. So, but this is definitely longleaf pine. And so if we come along, now here's another shrub species, a lot like the scrub oak, so not achieving too much height, but this is Sparkleberry, and I got the treat to see this thing in full bloom. When you find these rascals in the sunshine, they give you quite a thrill, especially during their blooming season. Sparkleberry is famous. You got the Sparkleberry roads, and Sparkleberry is named after a lot of different places, especially in our Midlands. And so just little tiny white flowers. They droop down and they remind you of, they remind me anyway, of blueberries. And that makes good sense because this is an actual blueberry. It's in the same genus as blueberries, as this Vaccinium arboreum, because this is one of the few blueberries that sort of achieves a tree-like presence. It grows, nice and tall. The fruits, I get asked, can you eat them? And yeah, if it goes down your esophagus, you can eat it. I tell the kids that all the time, but it might not be good for you. And this is fine, but it's not tasty. It's nothing like our cultivated varieties of blueberries that I've been trying to beat the mockingbird to in my backyard, but he gets up earlier than I do lately. Okay. So we're cruising through, we're making our way just through the woods, down the dirt road that's available when you enter the parking lot. I had done a little pan on Sparkleberry. So yeah, it goes up. This is a little choppy on your screen, but it goes up and there's just, it's almost like it snowed in the spring or summer when you get one of these in full bloom. I think they ought to be in everybody's yard, and I'm a hypocrite because I don't have one in my yard, but they just have a great growth habit and beautiful flowers if they get some sunshine. So Sparkleberry, sometimes called Farkleberry, but those are the two names that I hear most commonly. Now here's a look through all that. I mean, so there's longleaf pine out there, there's turkey oak out there. Underneath along the ground cover, you see what's called Bracken Fern. That's a little odd because ferns are usually down, wet areas. But Bracken Fern is especially good at vegetative reproduction. So a lot of these little fern leaves are actually connected underneath the ground. And so we don't have to have, ferns usually need the water because they are still reproducing with sperm that need to swim. So you need a moist substrate for the sperm to swim to the egg and fertilization to occur. But if you can do things vegetatively, like Bracken Fern likes to do sometimes, you can move on up into the uplands, and Bracken Fern is good at that. But anyhow, you're just in a very dry ecosystem here. And so I wanted to kind of try to capture what it looks like as you pan through this. So I'm going to move off to the left. And I'm just panning the camera off to the left. And eventually you start to see the land sort of sink away down into this area right in here. Kind of gets dark and shady, and you can see the elevation change. And if you're thirsty, you're thinking about, man, I'm going to check out what's down there. But that is sort of the nature of walking up in a lot of instances on these Carolina bays. They are in an otherwise upland situation. There is no river or stream or tributary that flows into them. They're just an all of a sudden experience that you come up upon in these areas. Okay. So there's Bracken Fern again. We've seen that. I'm going to go through. And so as you get down to that dark space that hopefully you were able to see a little bit of, the vegetation also changes. So we've got a change in elevation, but we also have a change in vegetation. It becomes increasingly populated with these evergreen shrub species. A lot of the nature books will call this a pocosin vegetative community. And that is a vegetative community that has characteristics of evergreen shrubs typically. And I'm going to just walk through a few of these different ones that you'd experience here. And in some debate, I mean, I always wonder why are we all of a sudden going to evergreen species? You know, it's kind of odd. And there's been a number of different papers on this that show different things, frankly. You know, some of these species are, they're in a nutrient poor ecosystem to begin with. My granddaddy he had a wonderful garden in the middle of the sandhills. I don't know how he did it, lots of fertilizer, but otherwise it's just hard to grow anything there. And so if you're doing business in the sandhills, you got to hold on to what you got. Song about that. But evergreen leaves do help preserve and hold things like nitrogen inside the plant. And so if it's nitrogen is hard to come by and you can find a mechanism by which to store it, it could behoove you to do so. These leaves, some of these leaves of these species are doing that. Others are cutting down. They have a very lustrous, very waxy covering, a cuticle to the leaves, and they're kind of cutting down on transpiration because strangely enough, when you have roots that are down in wet soils all the time, it's actually hard to get, it's actually hard, because of the physiology, it's hard to get water, believe it or not, sometimes. And so you want to hold on to the water that you have if your roots are always encumbered by it. And so the waxy cuticle helps preserve moisture. It also helps defend the plant. I mean, this is anecdotal, but I don't see a whole lot of insects, you know, damaging the leaves of these evergreen species. And so in some of these, it's been shown that they are very defensive. They help protect the leaves against intruders such as caterpillars and thereby preserve the leaf upon the shrub for longer periods of time. But probably for several different reasons, this has become a quality that is highly adaptive at the margins of Carolina bays and the margins of some sandhills and coastal plain streams. You know, if you ever walk down to a stream or Blackwater River in the coastal plain, you often have to push through some of this thick evergreen shrub vegetation to get there. So let's look at a couple of these species. All right, so here's this is so weird talking to you guys through a computer, but if we were out there and the first thing you would have noticed was a smell. It would have been the pleasant smell of all the blooms out here, and especially the ones that are coming off of this plant, which I'm pleased to say is making its way through the nursery trade. And you can actually purchase this. This is called Virginia Willow, or here's the bloom right here, or sometimes called Virginia Sweet Spire. We've cultivated this a little bit, got some little more decorative blooms on it and that kind of thing. But I grow this in the yard and it reproduces vegetatively, and it just is a wonderful spring shrub. It comes up about to your waist and just brings in pollinators early in the season. That's the interesting thing. You see a lot of these plants out here and you say, well, I can't reproduce those conditions at my house. And that may be true, but that might not be the only reason those plants are growing in those places. I remember a sycamore tree growing. It's at Clemson Sandhill Station. It's up on the top of a sandhill, and it's the happiest sycamore tree I've ever seen. Usually you see those down in the swamp, but if it can find a way to make a living, if it's it may just be there because it worked. Sometimes these things do well in other places. It's always nice to plant natives if you can. So Virginia Willow or Virginia Sweet Spire, fantastic flower and smell that goes with it. And by the way, I'm peering out through this shrub thicket to something that is a little more vast. We'll get there in a minute. Other shrubs that you witness, this is a red bay, and you know, there's been a lot of controversy over, well, why is the Carolina Bay called the Carolina Bay? Does it look like the bay in the background where I am out here at I actually own several islands. I'm on one of them now. That's what you're looking at in the background. That's what happens when you become a naturalist, you know. But it's not, you know, it's not obviously not a bay that's on the coast. These things are inland. They're not right against the coast. Am I in trouble?
We've got a question from the audience, actually.
Okay.
Andrea wants to know, is a little Henry a Virginia willow? I just planted some of them.
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Is a little Henry a Virginia willow?
I don't know the name Little Henry. The fancy name, if you've still got Little Henry's little box and pot and all that, the fancy name is Itea virginica, or Virginiana, one of the two there. So it starts with the I. Itea is the genus, and so if the plant of the box still has the plant name on it, that's what you would look for to make sure. And I can look that up later.
Lynn jumped in and just said yes, it is.
Okay, Lynn, thank you. Little Henry, I've got to add that to my list of common names. Okay, thanks. So this is a little red bay, and so yeah. So why is a Carolina Bay called a Carolina Bay? It's not along the coast. Maybe it has to do with bay trees, which happen to surround Carolina Bays oftentimes in this evergreen shrub bog. And so here's red bay. You know, host plant to things like Palamedes swallowtails. If you're into butterflies, they love to lay eggs on these things. And red bay, of course, is a familiar smell. If you like to cook, it's in your spice rack, and you put it in your deer chili and whatever else you use it for. So, but one of the ways that I like to recognize red bay is by its odd features, which include these little warts that are often upon it. So you can scratch and sniff this species, and you say that's bay. But if you don't do that, if you don't have that, you can look at these little warts that often are all over the leaves of these things, and they're actually inhabited by little tiny insects called psyllids. They're little. If you take a cicada and make it microscopic, it kind of looks like that. You can crack these open in the spring and summer and actually take a hand lens and look at them. But this is a little parasite that lives with the red bay. And unlike some of the other parasites that red bay has, unfortunately, this one has lived with it for eons. And so the two actually get along pretty decently. It doesn't cause the demise of the red bay like some of the other issues red bay's facing. But red bay does well around the margins of the Carolina Bays. So that would be one possibility for the name. And then I'm going to move. There's another picture of red bay. There's some little flowers there. This guy's in the laurel family. The flowers are not terribly noticeable, but it'll have pretty little bluish fruits here later on in the season. And here's sweet bay, another, and this one was blooming when I was out there. So this guy is here's a picture of the one I actually saw there. I used to put these. My first car was smelly. That I have to be careful, you know. But it smelled of cigarette smoke. So not because of me, but because of the previous owner. And so I used to get red bay blooms and stick them up in the dash. It's the best smell ever. Sometimes too strong. You have to crack the windows, but. You know, the magnolias are famous for that, right? I mean, if you have a magnolia in your yard, they were doing this business a long time ago. They're very ancient, and one of the ways they attracted things to come pollinate them is by smell. And so beetles have, you know, not the best eyesight, but really good smell. And so beetles move into these flowers even before these flowers are opened up, and they move in there and complete their life cycle and do some of the pollination that's needed on the magnolias. And so, but anyway, I'm glad for the beetles and I'm glad for the smell. But this is sweet bay. And I've been out to Savage Bay before when this was populated with caterpillars of eastern tiger swallowtails. So it's another great host plant. Hey, Shannon.
Hi. Jean wants to know, are Sweet Bay and Red Bay being decimated by parasites?
By parasites, Red Bay is especially encumbered with parasites. Yes, they seem to, where I see them, they seem to sprout back up from the rootstock, kind of like chestnuts are able to do for some time. But Red Bay is definitely encumbered by several different parasites, not the least of which is something called the Asian Ambrosia beetle. It's it brings a fungus that causes detriment to the Red Bay, and this happens a lot of times when we're bringing species that have co-evolved with others in a different place, and they come here. They come without their checks and balances, so to speak, and so we have to be real careful about that. The fire ant, I always tell the story because we're the USC Sumter fire ants, and pretty good mascot because I'm scared of fire ants. But if you go to Argentina, where they're from, you cannot find them. When you do, kick open the mound and they go down in the ground as fast as possible, running away. It's because all these predators and parasites that come for them. But here they showed up without those, so they're sort of taken over. So yeah, Red Bay is unfortunately faced with one of those challenges.
And Charlotte wants to know, do you notice a changing climate changing this habitat?
Great question. I do, and I mean, I'm sure there's a study or a paper somewhere that maybe documents the temperature change, but it's almost like, when you go to Congaree Swamp National Park in the middle of summer, you drop down in there on the boardwalk and it's just this cool, like 5 or 10 degree difference. It's like that. And so I suspect that's partly to do with some of the shade of the shrubs, some of the evaporative cooling that's going on, but it's definitely a pleasant place. And I was cooled off even more than that because the hip boots that I donned on my way out there had several leaks in them. But it was nice.
That's
okay.
a question, so I'll disappear again.
Okay. Last of the 3 bays, and by the way, all these are in the pretty well available now in the nursery trade, more and more so. This is Loblolly Bay, and great flower. Not leaves don't smell quite as strong as Red Bay and Sweet Bay, but they have these interesting little. The botanists would call that probably crenate. They sort of like just dull little teeth on the margins there, and a flower that just knocks you out. It's just gorgeous and smells fantastic, and all the insects agree. So that's Loblolly Bay. 3 bay trees that I see, especially the first 2 on the margins of the bays. Okay, so now we're, one more, sorry. So this is another one that I've planted in my yard. It's doing well. It does fine, up out of the wet soil, and it's called Titi, T-I-T-I, or Cyrilla, C-Y-R-I-L-L-A, and racema flora, because this little flower part is called a raceme. It's going to burst open into kind of this creamy white. I think I put a picture of it here. There's the butterflies, probably captivating, but there's the flower of that thing. It's just fantastic. And this, I don't know what it is about it, but it must pump out a lot of nectar or good pollen, because this thing I think is adorned with maybe more pollinators than anything else in my garden, other than maybe the button bushes. So if you can get your hands on one of these, they're great. They make a good backdrop against a wall or something, because they're evergreen. They lose a few leaves, but they're quickly reproducing them. So this is Titi, another great tree. All right, here we are out into the wetland, and I've got water flowing in my boots, and it feels good, actually. I was glad I had a leak in my boots. They were 20 years old anyhow. I'm going to pan to, so again, just think about this. We walked through high, dry sandhills, and all of a sudden, bam, there's a big body of water. There was no dam, there was no stream. It's just a bunch of water here. And I'm going to just kind of chop through this, moving right to left. Some old trees that have been harvested back in the day before this was protected. by the DNR, as well as Henry Savage, who's a name that is very, very common among early conservationists here in this area. Let me chop on over. There's a big buttress of a cypress tree. Talk about here in a second. Yeah, so there you go. Nice open water. You know, you don't have the dense shrubs anymore. You're coming out into open water, open habitat. Only a few trees able to make a living out here. Okay, and so let's take a look at those. Well, actually, I couldn't resist. I took a dip net with me, and I wanted to see what was underneath the water. And I'm not making this up, although I could make up a lot since I'm on the computer. But I mean, I took one scoop, one single scoop, and that was all I could talk about for this and a little video I'll put together, you know, after this. I mean, it was just literally several hundred different little organisms that my eyes could see swimming around in this little tiny D net that's maybe, you know, 10 inches big, and that was all I needed. And so I mean, right away I had this guy in the middle, which is a tadpole who's slowly getting his hind legs. Maybe I had to guess on this, maybe a southern toad breeder. They breed fairly early, as well as the southern leopard frogs breed early. If you go to Savage Bay at night, which I actually don't think you're supposed to, because I think it's open at daylight hours, but I'm just saying, if you're near Carolina Bay at night in the spring, you should bring some earplugs, because it is popping with the sounds of frogs. Okay, and so so they had a good little reproduction, and I think too, you know, somebody asked me this. We've kind of, this has been a stressful time for so many reasons, you know, especially in the last week. But I think the time that we spent off the roads and sort of letting nature do its thing, you know, during the early breakout of the COVID-19 virus, I think it probably did wonders for wildlife. And there's some evidence for this already. And I'm going to be really interested to see some of the scientists that publish studies about this later on, because so much of these amphibians are moving to these places and they're crossing roads, and those roads were not traveled as much. And so their migration was less encumbered by our presence. And plus we've had rain, so this place was just thumping with life. So here is, just above that is a damselfly larva. And so you have dragonflies that hold their wings out to the side. Damselflies wings up above when they sit at rest. So this is a baby damselfly is what I'm saying. And those little things coming out the rear end, those are gills. So they breathe with those appendages, as well as swim with them. They can use them as paddles, which is really neat. These guys are predators. Okay, so they've got a big scoop that they're reaching out and grabbing tiny microorganisms. Just above this is a water boatman. This is a true bug. He's not too far distant from something like a stink bug in the garden. They're in the same group. In fact, they eat in a similar way. So damselfly is a predator, but the water boatman, he goes up to little plants that are up in the water, and he sticks his little beak inside them and draws out, he vomits inside them, kind of digests things, and then sucks it back up. Really pleasant way of thinking about it. Is it lunchtime anyway? Hopefully y'all are on lunch break and you can think about that. He's a plant eater, which is kind of neat. But those last pair of legs, they are turned into boat oars, and he can just get it across the water. Very talented swimmer. And let me see if there's another picture of the, yeah, so just kind of move. And here's, I mean, I'm telling you, it was just crawling. So right here, I'm trying to say the names of these because you guys can look them up later, better pictures. But this is if you ever played in the backyard, my son has been keeping a roly-poly colony. This is a aquatic roly-poly down here in the bottom of your screen, believe it or not. Aquatic sow bugs, sometimes they're called. These are detritivores. They eat about, depending on the species, about anything, but these were especially abundant in my dip net. And yeah, so there's so the roly-poly, it's a crustacean. The one in your backyard is a crustacean too. They breathe with gills. That's why they roll up sometimes. Either they're scared of you, or they're trying to preserve the moisture and keep their gills nice and wet. And then another one is this side swimmer. So that thing it looks like it's laying on its side because it is. It swims around on its side. Sure, there's some good reason for this, but this is especially prevalent as a little macroorganism, macroinvertebrate inside the Carolina Bays. So just tons of life. Let me move to the next slide. There's another picture of the sow bug, and another close-up of the tadpole there. Let's see. And then this guy, who doesn't love a amphibian, even a salamander? So this is a aquatic. Oh, sorry. Hey, Shannon.
I think you're about to answer the question, so I'm going to let you
Okay.
go.
All right. So we got salamanders in here. Larval salamanders. This is one. This is you have to. Larval salamanders are tough to ID. In my opinion, there's people who are good at it, but I'm just making excuses. But you gotta. When they're larvae, especially these, you got to turn them over. I didn't want to manipulate this guy too much because they're so young and tender. So I left him alone. But this is probably a spotted salamander larva. That would be our state amphibian. It could also possibly be a mole or a tiger. I was really hoping it's a tiger. I may go back in a couple of weeks and see if I can find maybe a more mature larva. But the salamanders move in and they lay their eggs in early spring. I mean, I'd even say winter. I mean, January, February, you get a rainy night over 50, 60 degrees, and they come from miles around, and maybe not miles, but long distances, migrate in here and have one big breeding frenzy. And this is the product of that. This guy's feeding on a lot of the invertebrates that we took a look at just a minute ago. Okay. Another picture of the water boatman here. Make sure I'm not leaving anybody out. Yeah, that's the water boatman there. I thought I had oh, I do. So take a water boatman, turn it upside down, and make the legs a little bit longer, and make it predaceous. I guess I'm not that similar after all. But this is a back swimmer. He swims around on his back. Loves the backstroke. So and part of the reason they do this is that their top side, or their dorsal surface, the one that's actually facing down, is silvery kind of gray. And so that blends in really well. If they're kind of up toward the top of the water, if there's a predator underneath and they're looking up, they see shiny bright, then that means that the white side, the dorsal surface of this insect, blends in with the sunshine above, keeps them a little bit safe. This guy's a predator, and he will make you think twice about holding him again if you do so one time, because he's got a beak that he sticks inside his prey, and then dissolves their insides and sucks them back out. He's another bug, another true bug, back swimmer.
So Austin, if we could actually go back to where you had aquatic sow bug, Dave wants to know, there was a side swimmer and he wants to know if that was another amphipod.
Yeah. Yes. I'm trying to find it. Another common name for them is scud. That's not the scientific name, but yes. I'm looking for.
You can't find the video. It's all right.
Okay. Anyway, but yeah, they're all crustaceans, and they all are just incredibly abundant in the wetland. Probably making good food for that salamander larva. Let's see. All right, so I was kind of about done with the animal. I mean, of course, there was things buzzing me above, and so I had my trusty butterfly net with me. And when these insects mature, they become adults, and so damselflies and dragonflies are up above the water, and they're mating and they're laying eggs inside the water. And I managed to catch this guy, and I really wish it could have been in person because I would have been like high-fiving everybody and maybe pushing people into water and stuff. Because I always have a hard time catching this individual. It never seems to land, and it's just very, fast and dynamic in its flight. This is a Carolina saddlebags, so named after our colony, Carolina. Saddlebags comes from the fact that these little dark squares here, or whatever you want to call them, kind of look like saddlebags on the side of a horse body, maybe. These individuals have a reddish hue to them, kind of a reddish tint. There's also a black saddlebags in our state. But this is the Carolina saddlebags, and I caught a male here. No surprise, they're kind of coming in and setting up territory. That little tiny little thingy there, I mean, that's what it is. That's the penis, the thingy. And so that tells me it's a male. He moves his sperm from here up to there before finding a female. That way he can take his little appendages back here and attach them to the back of her head, and she can reach around and receive his sperm with her abdomen. You've seen them together, and that's how the tango kind of works for them. But this guy was abundant. I also saw, I couldn't get my net around it, but migratory dragonflies, the common green darner was making its way back up north, and they're known to move north and then south again. Sort of like the monarch does, different generations. It's not the same organism, individual moving the whole way, but he was hunting and dumping eggs and inside this wetland. So those were some of the species up above. All right, so back to a couple of the plants that can make a living out in the water. So we started, remember, up in the high sand hills, species up there. You come through that little barrier of evergreen shrubs. Now we're out in the middle. Couple of species can survive this, and here's one of them, and it's pond cypress. So if you've done congaree before, I'm going to stop this, I think, right there. And if you've done congaree, you're familiar with like bald cypress or any of the big swamps of the southeast, the river floodplains. You're familiar with bald cypress. Pond cypress, some people say, botanists argue that they're the same species, but if you decide there's a difference, then the differences would be things like, the buttress and the diameter of the tree is usually not quite as big in pond cypress versus bald cypress. Pond cypress tends to occupy isolated wetlands that do not have a river or tributary flowing through them. If you remember the cypress knees of congaree and the bald cypress, those get tall. There's records of them being 8 feet tall, those little roots that pop up vertically. Pond cypress has tiny little stubby knees that only come up just a little bit, and they're noticeably different. This achieves, I mean, look at the canopy. It's just fabulous. And I love cypress when the needles just come out because they're so lush, but you can see all up through here. There's plenty of sunshine. Let's see if it'll pan on up for you. Oh, and then I go back down, but I think I got a picture of the leaves. There we go. So there's the needles, and so pond cypress will often have needles that don't like fan out quite as much as bald cypress does. So they sort of stay pressed to the stem or to the rachis of the leaf instead of fanning out like bald cypress is so feathery. So those will be the differences if you decide that they're two different species. But pond cypress can do well out in the water for long periods of time. And in my visits to Savage, I sometimes see things like sweet gum and others kind of creeping into the bay during the dry season. But in years when there's plenty of water for long periods of time, those guys get kicked back out. And it's only the pond cypress, some of the grasses that come in later, and this little rascal here, which is famous if you're in the Carolina Bays and the vegetation that's there. So this is a pond spice is the name, and so it has little, to me, zigzag stems. They kind of just go, especially if you look up here, they kind of go back and forth and back and forth. A little leaf that's not too much to brag about. This, by the way, this would be in the laurel. This would be in the same family as the red bay, which is why we're sort of worried about it falling victim to some of the, parasites that are affecting a red bay. But I've seen Palamedes swallowtails laying eggs on this before, and that's what I said. Well, that's odd. I thought Palamedes only laid eggs on red bay, but then I looked up this species and learned that it was in the same family, and so they've got the same good stuff that the Palamedes swallowtail needs. But pond spice, and here we go, and you see some more of the zigzag nature of these stems, especially up here at the top, and just a little shrub, maybe 6-8 feet tall. And the neat thing is, later in the year, you can come out in the bay when it's dry, and you got these beautiful red berries that reminds you of one of the holly trees or something. I got some. You can't see. I'm drinking tequila. I'm on the bay, drinking my margarita. So, anyway, so beautiful red berries here in the late season, and that's the nature of the pond spice. Okay. All right. And so, all right, I just love all these things. I know I got to move along here. All right, a couple more here. So this is one that I scooped up accidentally, and a lot of times you see green growth underneath the water. Okay, so this is another one that can live in just pure standing water. And if you scoop some of those up and you see these little tiny bladders that are all up and down the stems, that's bladder wort. Wort means plant, and bladder means it's got a bladder on. What's it doing with that? Well, it's a carnivorous plant. So these little tiny brownish colored things are filled with air. They've got little hairs on the outside of them, and those hairs are little tripwires, basically. So a little microorganism comes up, and they fiddle with that, and that bladder opens up. It's full of air. The water rushes in, and the water carries with it that little microorganism, and then it shuts back up and slowly consumes the prey. Pretty neat species, and they got great flowers. I mean, they come up. This is not the same species I just showed you, but it's one very similar. They come up. They have yellow flowers, or they'll have purple flowers is another common one that we have here, purpurea. But bladderwort is the name. Great little species, making a good living in there. Okay. Now, if you come out later in the summer, okay, the wetland is dry and it's full of different grasses that are doing well out there. And therein lies the advantage to so many of the critters that I just showed you. The wetland is temporary. So it does not hold water. Most bays don't hold water all year round. You would think that's not good. But what that does is that precludes the presence of fish. And fish, or most fish anyway, and fish are the biggest predators in our ecosystem, our aquatic ecosystem. So it's almost as if the frogs and the salamanders and the dragonflies and damselflies and the side swimmers, they're all like, let's go, make babies here, because we got a better chance than we would if we went down to the mill pond, and they have reproductive strategies and timetables and that coincide with the bay filling up with water in January and February and drying out by midsummer. So the bay, we've had rain here, so it's probably still full, but it's usually dry by July or August for sure. And so they've already metamorphosed by that time, and they've moved on into the uplands, and they're ready for the next season. And I saw an interesting study. It was on so there's another species that I think I had pictures of and I might have missed, but it's a predaceous diving beetle. The bugs that I showed you, the back swimmer, water boatman, and then the beetle that I'm talking about now, those don't have gills. So they're not stuck here. Okay. They can get up and move, fly away to new wetlands when they want to. They're not stuck in the same way that a damselfly larva with gills is. So there's a predaceous diving beetle that actually moves into these wetlands when they're drying out. Seems counterintuitive, but it likes to prey upon stuff that didn't quite get far enough on its life cycle to get out of the wetland. It kind of goes around like a hyena and preys upon the weak and the weary that are not making it out of the wetland.
Austin, Mark wants to know, how do the bays fill with water?
Yeah, great question. Sorry, I totally skipped that. So they fill, and I'll get to that a little bit, but they fill with rain. They fill with rainwater, and so yeah, that's all it is. And that's also why they're sort of nutrient poor. You know, they don't have a river flooding them with new nutrients every so often. So it's rainwater. All right, now, so I do this with my kids at Sumter, and you know, so we've experienced that. We pretended that we don't know what a bay is, if, you know, or maybe you just don't, and we're like kind of scratching our heads now. One of the ways, I said, people have experienced these things for many years, but I think the light bulbs really started to come on with the advent of aerial photography, and so we can kind of do that with Google Earth, and it's kind of like an Easter egg hunt. Or when my youngest likes to dig potatoes, because you're just looking for little round circular things all over the surface of the earth. And so I am going to attempt to stop sharing my screen for 1 minute. Then I'm going to go to Google Earth, and I'm going to share my screen again, and we're going to go on a little adventure. So hold tight, stop share. Okay. Hopefully I'm back. Am I good, Shannon? Okay.
You're good.
Okay, we're hey, who's hungry? It's McDonald's right there. I'm gonna zoom in, don't worry. And what I want you to look for are little egg-shaped, you know, circle features, ellipses, I guess, upon the ground. And I'm gonna get in about 1,000 to 500 feet. We'll just start at Mickey D's, because I mean, you know, I'm kind of in the mood for a Happy Meal. I've been missing fast food. I've been still social distancing, but I mean, I might head out after this, because I'm supposed to be talking about bays and I'm talking about Big Macs. But look at this crazy little shape right here, that is partly obscured now by McDonald's and Simpson's Ace Hardware. This is Sumter, because, you know, I teach in Sumter, so we'll kind of do the Sumter thing here. But we've got a little egg shape there that's a little odd. And so that's what we're looking for right there, those kinds of features. And if you start anywhere along Highway 1 or I-20 and go south, you know, do this after this little lesson just for fun. Go southeast, you'll find these things absolutely everywhere. So let's do that for just a minute. We'll go down Pinewood Road here. I've got another one here. They all look a little different because, you know, farmers said, well, hey, there's some water in there. Let's stick a ditch in it, and we can plant trees, or we can farm. Which, I mean, no criticism there. That was an ingenious activity. But a lot of these still somehow preserve the shape. I think my daughter's bunny is escaping. I want to set it free anyway. It deserves to be in the wild. Let's go on down here toward Kane Savannah. Here we go. So I got one here. If you look, I got one looks like hiding out up here. It's kind of like half farmed and maybe half wet kind of thing. I got an old one right here. Am I doing okay, Shannon?
Do you mind zooming? I can't tell if we need to zoom out or zoom in, but we're having kind of the same issue seeing it as we did when we
Okay.
were this.
Okay. So can you see this?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm zoomed in, and that's fine. I can stay right here because I'm close to a lot of these things. I'll pause. Here's another one here. And I think I've kind of made my point. What I want you to do after this is just get on Google Earth and cruise through the coastal plain, and you'll see these shapes absolutely everywhere. One of the best ones, let's go to Myrtle Beach. See, I won't be so jealous of my background because I know that a lot of you are. Here's another one of your heritage preserves. I'm going right behind the strip. The strip at Myrtle Beach. Look at all those bays. Got one here, there. This is Lewis Ocean Bay Heritage Preserve. Big cluster of bays. And these, thank goodness, have been protected. Okay, good enough. So I'm gonna go back to my PowerPoint. So I'm gonna stop my share for 1 second. And
Austin, I know you just said that those particular bays were being protected, but Charlotte wants to know if bays are being protected.
yeah, that is an open-ended question. And so they were removed from, this was a decade ago or more. They were removed from the definition of a wetland some time ago, and that meant that they were not protected. And a wetland was defined as anything that had a tributary going in and out of it, that was part of a wetland system, so to speak, and it was not isolated. And so this made the bays fairly vulnerable. But I mean, the other side of that is that in recent years, there has been some case law decisions and stuff that did give power. So that's the Clean Water Act is what I was just talking about. But there's been some case law that suggested that DHEC, local municipalities and government bodies do have the power to decide whether these wetlands are encumbered or not. So yeah, it's a back and forth. Unfortunately, a lot of them have been altered, but it's been shown Richard Porcher and others have restored some of these too. So put the pieces back together, fill in the ditch, and the rest will often happen.
And Austin, one more question.
Yeah, sure.
Lynn has her son with her, and he wants to know how the bays were initially formed.
Let's go there right now.
And awesome. I also just wanted to flag the time. It is 12:56.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So our people aren't kicked off, or I guess. All right, let me just talk fast. And if you can stay on, I'll keep talking. But so here we go. We got this crazy elliptical shape here, and people say, what the heck is going on with it? Now notice, I didn't even mean for this to happen, but I've got a pile of sand here. It shows up here, but it's often the case that you got a pile of sand on the rim of the northeast and then on the southeast end as well. Okay. And so it was, there's been several hypotheses about how these formed. But let me tell you the characteristics of them all. They're usually just shallow depressions in the ground. They're usually elliptical shape. They have a sand rim on the northeast end, the southeast end, sometimes both. So a pile of sand that came from somewhere, hint, hint. They hold water for part of the year. They're usually on unconsolidated sediments, loose sands. They're usually in the, they're in the sand hills and the coastal plain. They're not in the Piedmont and the mountains, for example. And they're isolated. There is no tributary feeding them any water. So various hypotheses emerged. One of the most popular that I've heard is the meteorite. Let me say one more thing that we've learned in recent years. These piles of sand have now been dated in many cases. Okay, so we actually know when those piles of sand were piled up. And you know, if those piles of sand have something to do with the formation of this bay, well, this gives us some indication of when the bays were formed. The results have come back showing that bays are anywhere from a few thousand years to just north of 100,000 years. These sand rims have been dated. Moreover, some of these bays have multiple sand rims in them, and they kind of you know, cradle one another going to the interior. And those sand rims in the same bays sometimes have different dates. Okay, so this is largely thought to reflect the origin date of the bays. All right, so different hypotheses. One was meteorites, right? So the challenges to that hypothesis are that in many cases, meteorites don't tend to make the same type of shape that we have here in the Carolina Bays. They often will have, you know, a rim around the entire shape and not just two ends. And then they'll have, you know, evidence of impact in some way in the quartz grains that are underneath or the bedrock that's underneath. And that hasn't been found here yet. And I think probably the most compelling to me is that all the meteorites would have had to decide to only land in the sandhills or the coastal plain. I mean, you would think that a few of them would land in the mountains or the Piedmont, but they would all land at different places, or they all landed, you know, south of the fall line. And then we have these bays that have now been dated to have formed at different times. So the meteorites would have had to fall in here at different times. And if we have bays that were sort of developed, an individual bay that had multiple different sand rims formed at different times, the meteorites would have had to hit there at all those 3 different times, for example. So that hypothesis has largely been rejected by the scientific community, it would appear. Other things are like sinkholes. We do have sinkholes that hold water in South Carolina, but they don't tend to have the same shape. They don't tend to have the rims around them. You know, the ocean was another hypothesis, but so far we hadn't found where the ocean is actually making these types of shapes currently. So anyway, so what did it? Okay, so let me get there. All right, so a graduate student in the 1970s from USC really put this together in, you know, in a fashion that's been supported by scientific community. He went looking everywhere else. Where on earth do these things exist elsewhere? And he found there's some of these in Alaska, Canada, Chile. There's evidence of them historically in the Amazon, Texas. In some places, these shapes are still forming. And what he did was he did some lab studies, okay, and as well as looking around to see what's happening. And those places in other parts of the world had very similar characteristics to what we have here. How am I doing, Shannon? It's going to take me another 10 minutes. I'm sorry, y'all, if you have to go break your lunch break, but
We've got a few that can stay on and a few that have jumped off. So if you want to just keep going, I'll make sure.
I'll just keep going. All right, sounds good. I'll do better next time. So here's what they kind of discovered. So he measured, in addition to looking across the globe and seeing what's happening, he noticed that one of the very present things was wind. He noticed the wind was a very strong factor where these wetlands were existing. And that also the presence of water for at least part of the year was a very strong factor. And so, you know, and he did some lab studies that said you could basically take just about any shape, and if you fill it with water and impact it with wind, you could form a Carolina Bay. So I did this in a rudimentary way to try to make it work on PowerPoint, but I think it's going to work out. So here's a little circle. Just pretend it's full of water. If you put together the wind histories of the Southeast for the past 100,000 years, they suggest that some of the winds have come from the northwest and moved to the southeast. Okay, that's been a very prevalent direction for wind patterns in the past. All right, if you throw some water on this wetland, you're going to have waves because the wind's going to turn into waves. The energy is going to move into the water. Okay, so some waves are going to form, and they're going to move in this direction with the wind. Okay, you have to imagine this was a very open landscape back then. The pollen records and all that suggest that during the Pleistocene, the Ice Age, that the wind was less encumbered by trees and stuff. It's sort of locked in now, these bays are. But historically, would have been an open habitat, like standing in a field and feeling the wind versus when you're in the forest. So wind is moving across, it's energizing the waves, and waves are an erosive force. So, we were at the state park at Edisto, and, you get in the water, and when you get out, you're like, 100 feet down from where you started. So waves are especially erosive, and they're especially erosive at the areas that are sort of perpendicular to their direction. So right in here, they can really move sediment substantially. I mean, this is why we put groins up. Big debate there at the beach, but it's called the Longshore Currents. So at the beach, so the wave crashes in, and it goes backsplash, and another one pushes that down, and so you're moving a lot of sediment from here, and it's got to go somewhere. At the beach, it goes down the beach. Here, it's got to go to the end of this wetland and settle. So I've got some wind. They're forming waves. I've got erosion, especially on the edges here, on this edge and on this edge, where the waves are scouring the sides and able to carry some of this sediment from the side to these ends. Now, if you think back of what we saw, the sand rims here, the sediment that's being scoured from these sides has to go somewhere. It lands upon the southeastern side of these Carolina bays. That's why I say some deposition, okay? He also measured the velocities of the water in Carolina bays currently, and found the velocities are still, even today, even though we got trees all over the landscape, partly, velocities are stronger along these edges. So that equals widening. You can widen this shape, especially here and here, and start to form, a shape that's more similar to a Carolina bay. Now, that's pointed the wrong direction, right? Because all the bays are facing southeast. The long axis is toward the southeast. I should have mentioned that earlier. But the good news is that the prevailing winds, the strongest winds historically, came out of the southwest. Okay, the wind histories have put together that those were where we got most of our wind. So you get wind here, you get waves just like we did it before. You got scouring and erosion here on these edges, right? And since this is where most of the wind came from, this is where you're going to get most of the deposition and most of the widening, okay? And there's our shape, okay? So you're carving out these ends on the northwest and the southeast side mostly, but you're also widening it in this direction. And in doing so, on an open landscape with loose sediment, and throw in 100,000 years, or thousands in some case, you can make yourself a Carolina bay. That tends to be the most supported hypothesis so far. So you take a shape like this and you make Carolina bay. Okay, questions about that? And I got one or two more slides. And okay, groovy.
I do have a question from Hannes. Is there something about the substrate where bays form that keep the water pooling there each year?
Yeah, a lot of them are, some of them have a clay layer underneath, but it's a combination of that. They can have if you've ever been through the sand hills, there's this clay called kaolin, and it is the stickiest stuff ever, and it is completely impermeable. There's a lot of times there's lenses of that clay underneath parts of the sandhills and coastal plain that help perch this water, but also you've scooped out a good bit of the sediment, and you've basically accessed the water table, at least in the winter and the spring when we still have good rains. So, and there's a whole debate too about, well, why was there a little depression there in the first place that that captured even a little bit of rainwater? And I can talk about that at the end if there's people that want to hang on to do that. But I want to stress the ecological importance of these things because it's tremendous. If you can advocate for these things wherever you live, it'd be a good use of your time. They're an oasis for animals around there. I mean, a lot of these places don't have necessarily a river, you know, a pond or anything, but here's a body of water that doesn't have to be connected to any of that, and it can be accessed by a tremendous amount of animals and plants. Down at the coast, the black bears love to live in those evergreen shrubs that form the circumference around the bays because they produce a lot of blueberries live there, and they are good cover. For example, pine barrens tree frog, that's you know, a special species here in South Carolina. There's 30 or so plants considered rare that live here. Venus flytraps, Carolina wiki, those live on the margins of Carolina bays, you know, in South Carolina. So the wetness there and the border between that and the open pine, you know, savanna gives plenty of sunlight, and the presence of fire. It's quite a medley of things that have to come together, but you need those bays for that low moist soils that they love. Avifaunal, you know, is enhanced. So more birds, because you have a different habitat. It's more stochasticity. It's more places for animals to live. And then not to mention they store water, right? So, I mean, this is the same, you hear about floodplains all this. We need to preserve our floodplains because they store water. Well, so do Carolina bays. And, you know, the aquifers are in, and the sandhills are very important to agriculture and to drinking. And so this is a place where that water can be stored and not run off and slowly replenish the water tables and the aquifers. Okay. Close with a couple of pretty pictures. I like flowers. This is down at Lewis Ocean Bay behind Myrtle Beach. A spreading pogonia orchid there in bloom on the edge of a Carolina bay. And there's our Venus flytrap, also in the same place down along the coast. And there's a picture of Savage Bay. And I hope like heck we can be there together, like close, like holding hands, like, you know, just high-fiving and hugging and stuff and all that. Just because it's getting old, you know. But anyway, in the late summer, this place cleans up, and it's a great walk through a place you just would never imagine could exist in the middle of you know, high dry sand hills.